Remember, when going on the offensive, group up as closely as possible and assault fixed positions that have you zeroed in. Good evening. Now, it looks like a Ukrainian Leopard 2A4 tank was destroyed by Russian artillery near Nova Pokrovka in the Zaporizhzhia region. It's the first case of Ukraine losing a Leopard tank that wasn't either a piece of farm equipment or some kind of mine-clearing vehicle that's been circulating the internet. Leopards and Abram tanks will undoubtedly keep being sent to Ukraine on the U.S. taxpayers' dime, so do not fear. However, it does make you question the amount of men lost and irreplaceable equipment. Amid the Canadian wildfire conspiracies, UFOs landing in western United States with 8-foot aliens walking around, let's touch base back in reality and share some observations on the Nova Kakhovka Dam. We'll get to that in just a second, but let's back up to the start of the offensive because it all ties together. Of course, Ukraine yielded to international pressure and launched the ill-fated offensive that seems to not be going so well. After months, they finally launched it and on the move, suffering massive losses in men and material, and losses are going to get worse. Russia claiming, now of course this is their claiming, and we're going to go back and forth between, yes, of course, both sides have their own reporting that is, of course, biased towards them, so we're going to cover both sides. But Russia claiming they killed 4,000 Ukrainian soldiers in the first 48 period. Now, the reason for Ukraine's impending failure, supposedly to the Gateway Pundit, is first, these are all observations, take it with a grain of salt, but I think they're realistic things people should be considering. First, Ukraine does not have the trained manpower to muster 300,000 combat-ready troops required to seriously threaten the Russians. This is true. We know they only have 70,000. Second, the troops that comprise the assault brigades have received different training from different countries, the US, UK, France, and Poland, and have not been trained to necessarily operate as an army of one on the move. Third, Ukraine lacks the tanks, mobile artillery, and close air support from fixed and rotary winged aircraft required to sustain an offensive beyond a week. Fourth, Ukraine lacks viable air defense systems and cannot stop Russian aircraft from pounding their positions that they've already, like I said, scouted out and planned for 5 months, mine the fields, set up the choke points, etc. An interesting observation here, and then we're going to get into the dam. The destruction of almost $1 billion in recently donated Western military equipment is likely to provoke a political upheaval in Kiev. This person says, I think Zelensky's days are numbered. In case you're interested in another warmongering candidate, take a listen to what Mike Pence has to say real quick.
Approach here. Now, I want to say President Joe Biden has been slow in providing military resources to Ukraine. I mean, they promised 33 Abrams tanks back in January. They're still waiting on them. We're waiting on F-16s to be transferred from somewhere.
It is worth noting, too, that NATO allies prepare unprecedented air deployment exercise over Europe in a show of force to Russia, as this counteroffensive has taken place with 2,000 U.S. Air National Guard personnel and about 100 aircraft taking part in the June 12th to 23rd maneuvers, so keep an eye on that. Also worth noting, Twitter files show FBI requested censoring of Twitter users on behalf of Ukraine, including American and Canadian journalists, so it's no surprise why my channel's views, as I've said before, have dropped off from getting 100,000 impressions to less than 1,000, but alas, like the video anyway, and we'll continue the good fight. Now, over to the dam and post-mortem analysis. Ukraine's cooling pond at Zaporizhzhia plant at risk after dam collapse. The cooling pond at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is in danger of collapse as a result of the destruction of the Kakhovka dam and the draining of its reservoir. Internal pressure of the water in the cooling pool could breach the dike around it, and the loss of the pool would not necessarily be catastrophic as other sources of water could be brought in, such as pumping trucks to prevent a meltdown of the plant's nuclear fuel, but a loss of cooling would dramatically increase the safety concerns of the plant, so it doesn't seem that it's a life-threatening issue right now. If I recall, 5 of the 6, I believe, are pretty much dormant, so only one of them is actually warm and needs to be cooled. Now on to the meat and potatoes. The post-mortem analysis on Kakhovka Dam breach by Simplicius the Thinker on Substack, so go check him out because it's definitely worth reading. It covers both sides, and I'm going to kind of skim through here of what I've highlighted. Now, How can this destruction favor Ukraine? Well, washes away a lot of Russian positions in the Kherson region. Russia had mined the entire region there to prevent the expected huge Ukrainian landing force attempt. This flood is now expected to potentially wash away a lot of Russia's mines. It also allows Ukraine, with the help of global media, to get another major psychological victory in the form of international pressure against Russia. If this ends up truly affecting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it will allow them to string it into another large false flag later on, depending on what type of damage is actually sustained to the nuclear plant. Also, if it ends up being detrimental to the Crimean Canal, once more imperiling the Crimean water supply, this could add additional pressure on the Russian government. It could also benefit Ukraine in allowing them to cross the Dnieper with the planned amphibious assaults. Also, the dam was a hydroelectric plant, and Russia was the beneficiary of the generated electricity. That means the loss of this electricity generation, coupled with the loss of this generation from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, could be a huge inconvenience to the Russians. Some of the counter arguments: Russia, having control of the dam, could have simply lifted the floodgates and at any point, if they wanted, to effect a huge flood downstream and release the reservoir. If Russia wanted to turn off the Nord Stream to Europe, why would they destroy it if they can simply turn it off at their end? Definitely questions worth asking. Also, Russia, because this was at the time they had withdrawn from Kherson and also just blown the Kherson Bridge in early November, supposedly, pro-Russian side states this was in fact a HIMARS strike. So interesting to note. The fact is, if the above is true, then both Russia and Ukraine have proven claims of hitting the bridge from last November. You guys remember this clip here. Let me skip forward. There it is. No one knows who was responsible for the blast. Also worth noting, how the heck would this actually benefit Russia? Well, Russian positions are also being swept away, but it can be said that Ukrainian positions inside those islands here in the middle of the Dnieper River near Kherson are also being washed away. Russia was having a hell of a time with focusing on the AFU constantly entrenching themselves on these marshy islands between Kherson and Russia's side of the Dnieper. Flooding conveniently allows Russia to wash away all of their forward positions. One of the key things Ukraine was doing in the islands, supposedly, is setting up drone repeaters and relays so they can be flown from Kherson all the way to Russia's position 5 to 10 kilometers out by amplifying the signal of the controllers. If Russia wants to cross the Dnieper and liberate places like Odessa, this dam needed to go. Some other benefits: it floods all the ammunition depots the Ukrainians had been building up. All their work over the past few months is going to be underwater now. The water also makes now a protective barrier for a few weeks, at least on the Russian west side, so Russia can concentrate on the north where the Ukrainian main counteroffensive is trying to develop. Now, the Russian flank is protected because of this flood. Otherwise, Russia would need to keep a lot more troops here and spread out. The Russians can also use this as local PR, saying that a flooded population will blame Ukraine and also help support the Russian narrative. Now, on one hand, it does not seem Putin style at all because it harms far too many civilians and goes against the entire creed of the small military operation, which was the preservation of civilians at all costs and a war only against the regime forces. But if Putin has in fact finally turned the special military operation to hardened generals and commanders like Suvorkin in the past who know how difficult decisions must be made to win a war, then anything is on the table. For now, Russian MOD, Ministry of Defense, got intelligence recently that the final huge assault to seize a nuclear plant was about to go down, and they effected a decisive action to stop it. Of course, the third theory is that it naturally happened. Evidence for the natural theory, which is that the dam collapsed on its own, is as follows. Satellite photos were released showing that the dam had already been massively leaking at the center in the days leading up to the breach. So that's definitely worth noting. And you also have the explosive theory that the dam broke in the middle, which naturally that's where all the water pressure would be, and that the mines upriver were actually the explosions that we were looking at online. If you were to plant explosives, you'd also do it in the center, so you could counter-argument there. The new theory, which is far more likely, is that Russian beach mines, which were washed away by the rushing waters upstream and were exploding all over the dam as they hit obstructions. You can see here in this video. Got that explosion right here. Bang. Another counter argument, Ukraine had begun filling up the Kakhovka reservoir, putting immense pressure on the dam. Ukraine controls several other dams upriver, such as a hydro plant in Zaporizhzhia city and in Dnipro city, and by playing with the water levels, they can pass more or less water downriver to the Kakhovka dam. Also worth noting. Here's a clip of Russians wading through the now swamplands flooded with 3-4 feet of water to try and get out of the city. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think? Was it a natural disaster? Was it the Ukrainians? Or do you think the Russians did it? Finally, worth noting, yesterday's offensive and all its attendant losses were completely fruitless for the Kiev regime as they were pushed back to their starting line. So it's definitely going to be a bloody conflict. I don't think the Ukrainians are going to come out on head. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the equipment. The time is certainly not on their side. Support is dwindling and finances are running out on the U.S. side. So leave a like, comment down below, subscribe with the notification bell to stay up to date, in the loop, in the know. I'll see you in the next one.